we've described a reasonable splitting of the monolith into the hello and auth microservices. And to get moving quickly, we've already provided you with the source code for each. If we take a quick look at the source code, we can see that the hello and auth microservices don't really contain anything new, they just group the endpoints in a different way. For the hello microservice, it has the root and the secure endpoint, and we see their implementations here. And the auth microservice has the login endpoint and an additional root endpoint that returns nothing. The purpose of the root endpoint is to hide away the default response that Katura returns if no root endpoint is provided. If we didn't define this, then the root endpoint would return some HTML saying essentially the equivalent of hello world from Katura. Okay, now let's build and run these, and we'll start by looking at the Docker files. For each microservice, they're the same. We have the few packages that need to be installed, and then the app directory becomes the working directory once the Docker container is built. In this case, you could use a single Docker file if you wanted, but keeping them separate is nice in case we need to change the environment for one of the microservices. These seem straightforward enough. Let's open terminal so we can start the containers and make request. In the left terminal window, I'll handle the auth microservice, and in the right terminal window, I'll handle the hello microservice. If we look into the README for either of these microservices, we can find the commands needed to build and run the Docker container. So here's our build instruction and then our run instruction. So I'll copy both of these. First to build, and then to run the container. So now we're in a Linux system that has our working directory for the auth microservice mounted into the container, and we can go ahead and build it. And one important thing to note while the microservice is building is that we're using port 8082 instead of 8080. Great, and after the build finishes, we can run the auth microservice. So we'll go build, debug, auth. And now it's running. And to ensure it's running, I'll go ahead and open another terminal window, and I can run a curl against the login endpoint. And remember, this is on port 8082. We'll go with login, and then we have to pass the username and password. And there we go. So it looks like the auth microservice is working. Let's go ahead and get the hello microservice up and going. So like before, first we need to build the Docker image, and then we need to use Docker run to create a container from the image. And pay attention here for the port, we're going to use port 8081. Okay, now we're in the Linux environment and we should be at the app directory. Let's go ahead and build the hello microservice. And once it's built, we can run the hello microservice. And now that both services are running, we should be able to make requests on the root and the secure endpoint. So let's clear the screen and we'll curl for the root endpoint, which this time we're on port 8081 for the hello microservice. The root endpoint is working. And then for the secure endpoint, we need to pass the token. So we'll go authorization, bearer, and then paste in our token, followed by localhost 8081 and the secure endpoint. And there we go. Just like before, we have our three endpoints, but instead of all being on one monolithic application, they've been split out into two separate microservices.